Everyone was watching the king. Would he deem Sir de Toux worthy of the fair Lady Jeanne de Longchamps? Had he shown enough respect? De Toux recited a poem extolling the virtues of the beautiful lady. He received applause and requests for an encore, but the court of love had to render its verdict. Presiding over it was Charles VI of Valois, with his chief assistant being the Duke of Orleans. It was the year 1401, and French society was reviving the customs of the early Middle Ages. By the end of the 14th century, plague had returned to France. This was not the first, second, or even the third wave. People were simply tired of worrying about it. Coincidentally, at that same time, King Charles VI's condition had noticeably improved. The king had been known to periodically descend into madness, failing to recognize those around him and capable of wreaking havoc in the palace. Once it was clear that the king was once again smiling and able to engage in conversation, his two uncles, the Dukes of Burgundy and Bourbon, approached Charles with a suggestion. Perhaps to lift the spirits in the capital, they could introduce some interesting entertainment. There was no money for lavish tournaments, so a modest pastime would be preferable. It was then that the well-educated king recalled the courts of love from earlier times and decreed, "Let the tradition be revived." Back in the 12th century, in Provence, enlightened knights spent their leisure time in such courts. These gatherings were more of a courtly social event than an actual trial, featuring delightful discussions. How to court a lady without compromising her honor. How to attract the attention of a beloved if she was enamored with another. The presiding officer would listen to various opinions and deliver a verdict. The most interesting speaker, the most persuasive and passionate, would earn the title of Prince of Love. There were dignitaries with whimsical duties, writes the era researcher Émile Colas, keepers, ministers, squires, treasurers of love letters, and gatekeepers of love gardens. To create a more inviting atmosphere for sweet conversations, minstrels were invited. Jean Poitevin, the true king of minstrels, played personally for King Charles and his court. The first session was scheduled, and the ladies of the French court were in a frenzy of excitement. At the court of love, their beauty was celebrated, poets recited exquisite verses, and the ballads were simply enchanting. Accompanied by string instruments, the high society of the 14th century gathered in a semicircle, honing their skills in the art of courtly conversation. The poets who received the loudest applause were awarded prizes, jewelry, small talismans crafted by the ladies present, gloves, and handkerchiefs. During the breaks between sessions, the audience was entertained by the actors, the Lefebvre brothers and Gillis Violin. That day, the title of Prince of Love was bestowed upon the Duke of Orleans, who also invited the participants of the proceedings to his castle for the next gathering. The event was such a hit that it was decided to repeat it. Soon after, courtiers made their way from Paris to the Duke's estate in Anjou. He had not invited the entire court without reason. Louis of Orleans wanted his wife, Valentina, to be present at the evening, and at that time, she was not living in Paris. The courts of love convened several more times, but their story came to an end in the year 1403. After that, there was little time for chivalric evenings. France plunged into civil war. The king fell back into madness, and the Duke of Orleans was murdered in the streets of Paris. It wasn't until more than 30 years later that a new king, Charles VII of Valois, dared to organize a similar evening. However, the tradition did not take hold during his reign. Later on, the poet Martial d'Auvergne published a collection of his works titled Courts of Love. This book of exquisite poems about romantic relationships became so popular that it went through 34 editions, and that was just by the mid-18th century. But that is a different story altogether. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, give a like, and thank you for your comments.